So I guess I'll get started. My name is Camille Cohenson. I work for the Gwaay Field Unit as the Cultural Resource Management Advisor, and I'm just going to start out by acknowledging that we are currently working and living on unceded Haida territory. So I'm super pleased that you all could join us tonight for the Gwaay speaker series. Tonight I am going to be your host for the speaker series, The Living Landscapes of Gwaay, and we're going to be talking about the archaeology program this summer. So Jenny Cohen is going to be your main speaker. She has a PowerPoint presentation that she's going to share. I'm just going to go through a little bit of housekeeping things. We are going to take questions. You can type your questions in the chat functions, and we'll do our best to answer everybody's questions, depending on the volume of questions and whether or not we can answer them. So I'm just going to ask Jenny to maybe bring up the slide deck, please. I'm just wondering, I don't see any like chat or anything, but can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Maybe okay, that's good. So I'm just going to start off. The Living Landscapes of Gwaay, Strengthening the Land and People in a Changing Climate is a Parks Canada Conservation and Restoration Program funded project following destruction at Gwaay, which was caused by a devastating hurricane force storm. So tonight I'm going to introduce the archaeological component of this project. Next slide, please. Gwaay is located on the southwest coast of Gwaay. It is a designated UNESCO World Heritage Site. It's also a National Historic Site and a Haida Heritage Site. It's a unique example of a traditional Haida village site. Here, human occupation is visible in the forms of upright and fallen poles, house pits, standing posts and beams of longhouses, midden sites, and habitation caves. The living landscape of Gwaay is still utilized and cared for by the Haida people today, and it's considered a very spiritual and a sacred place. So you can see some of the standing poles here in the slide, and outlined in yellow is where the village site is. So Gwaay is actually an island. The storm devastation occurred mostly in the village proper, which is outlined in the yellow area. Next slide, please. So the following photos that I'm going to show you, they represent the damages caused to the village during a hurricane force windstorm event in 2018. In these photos, you can sort of see a corridor of wind-thrown trees that fell throughout the village. If you look in the photo on the lower left, you can sort of see the poles lining the shoreline at the bottom. Hopefully everybody can see that okay. Most of the damage occurred within the village site or directly behind the village site. So this damaging event is what initiated the archaeology program that I will be speaking about tonight. The archaeological field component of the project comprised 3 years of post-impact archaeological recording and mitigation work in response to the site damage from this windstorm event at Gwaay. So 2021 actually marks the first year of the archaeological program for this project. It was supposed to start last year in 2020, but due to the global pandemic, things were put on hold until this year. So you can see quite a devastating event directly, and it caused a lot of damage, even along the brand new boardwalk in the village site. So all of these tree throws were previously standing before 2018. So again, in this photo, you can see a lot of the standing poles in the photo. If you take a closer look, a lot of the poles are along the shoreline. And also there are a lot of house features in this area. So together, the Government of Canada and the Council of the Haida Nation manage Gwaay National Park Reserve, National Marine Conservation Area Reserve, and Haida Heritage Site through the Archipelago Management Board. In the spirit of cooperative management, this has been a collaborative effort by Gwaay alongside Haida institutions, programs, and agencies in the Parks Canada National Office. Next slide, please. So this project was a huge success due to the huge amount of effort and dedication of a lot of people. Planning a large and logistically complex project in a remote setting during a pandemic is not an easy feat, and I really commend the passion and energy everybody brought to the project. Next slide, please. In the spirit of the Land Sea People Management Plan, we initiated good people working together to guide our planning and fulfill our responsibility to manage and protect the site based on traditional knowledge and laws. This has been a multidisciplinary collaborative effort led by Nadine Wilson, Mary Hart, Jenny Cohen, and myself, and we couldn't have pulled it off without many important partners. So in 2015, upon finding the devastating effects on the village, we immediately initiated an emergency archaeological response, which Jenny's going to go into a bit more. But this initial response happened in 2019, and it allowed us to collect cultural materials that were highly susceptible to damage. This response also allowed us to develop a plan for future mitigation. After we developed a sense of what needed to be done, we sought wise counsel with the Haida hereditary chiefs, informing them of the damages, our response, future plans, and ultimately obtaining their blessing to continue with archaeology in the village site. So anytime we sort of do these sort of projects, we always sort of seek that guidance from the CHN and the Haida hereditary chiefs, just to ensure that what we're doing is okay in this place and that we're following sort of Haida traditional laws. We also brought in Haida collections experts from the Haida Gwaay Museum to provide guidance in the field and also to advise during collections analysis stage, which is happening right now at the Haida Gwaay Museum. We also contracted the Haida Gwaay Watchmen, which is a local stewardship program, and they provided us with an on-site cook. They also provided increased interpretation to visitors during the fieldwork so that the archaeology crew could sort of focus on their work and excavations there. So with that quick intro, I'm really pleased to introduce you to Jenny Cohen, who's a Parks Canada terrestrial archaeologist. Jenny has spent many years in Gwaay. I've worked for Gwaay for 10 years now, and Jenny has been around doing archaeology longer than that in Gwaay. So she knows her cookies, this girl. So she's going to be your main speaker tonight, and I'm going to let her take over now. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Camille. Thanks for such a warm intro. I just wanted to echo Hawa. Thank you for everyone who put this project together. There's a lot of people. I want to name them all for the sake of time. They're all listed earlier, but just I really appreciate everyone who spent not only this field season, but the last few years planning leading up to this field season and supporting it. So what I'm going to talk about, I just have a brief overview here. So I'll give a bit of a summary of the work we did in 19 because it leads up into the work we did this year, which is the Living Landscapes project. And so I'll talk a little bit about the 2021 summer field work we did this year. That mostly consisted of house excavations, and then we did some island survey and testing around the whole island. And I'll give a little brief talk about our next steps in the future years. So in 2019, we came out and responded. We did a immediate post-impact archaeological assessment and safety and hazard tree assessment in January of 2019. So here we identified a lot of immediate threats to the site, and in preparation for making it safe for visitors, but also safeguarding all the cultural heritage on site. We came back again for a couple 8-day shifts with the tree removal crew to mitigate some of the tree throws, as well as do some emergency rescue archaeology and safeguard some of the vulnerable artifacts. So a lot, as you saw in those earlier pictures, a lot of the windfall happened in and around the village. The immediate impact inside the village were about 9 trees that came down with ground disturbance, and they directly affected 4 house subsurface, the ground of 4 houses, as well as when the trees came down, they impacted some of the surface wooden structures within the village. So this map shows the circles are where the ground disturbance occurred in the village and which houses were affected, and the red lines show how the trees fell across the village. So even though all those trees came down, the poles were largely left intact. This was pretty much the extent of the damage to poles from the storm. So consider that very lucky. This is a beaver pole, called 6X. It's through the museum numbering system, but part of it was impacted, but most of the other poles were not affected. Even standing structures, when the trees came down, they kind of came down between the structural remains. So on the left here, this photo shows before the storm and a standing pole in front of house 5, and 2 house posts on the right. And the photo on the right, you can't even see those house posts. But as we started the cleanup project and the branches were removed, you can see in the top right that the trees came right between all these structures. So it was a very close call. And there's a lot of work already done in 2019 to clean up the site. So this is, the top is the original impact and the progress. And then in March, how much was cleaned in this area. Just a note, this stump that was cut, you can see the strap on it. And so that was held in place because once that trunk was removed, gravity was kind of forcing the stump back upright. And we wanted to make that upright controlled because that was actually within a house. And we wanted to make sure that tree rewrites with as minimal damage as possible. So here's a different view of that tree here on the upper left corner. So this is this photo is, or these photos are from the back of the house looking towards the front and towards the beach. So this tree was growing on a house post, and when it came over, it pulled up with it a bunch of the house floor in the root ball and this mat of moss, and house floor was hanging in the air. The photo on the right shows a nurse tree growing on one of the house posts on the southwest side of the house. And when it came down, it pulled the post up out of the ground and horizontal as well. So quite a bit of impact in here. And this is some of the work we're doing. So this is house 3 is Nunstance's house, the village chief's house. And so this is a semi-subterranean house. Let's go back here. And there is 2 semi-subterranean houses in the village, and it's a pretty iconic and important structure. So we focused on this structure as a priority for the work. So part of it was the tree removal crew pulled the root mat down the house floor, and we prepped it to go through it later in the year. You can see this different angle of the stump being strapped down in place in the upper left picture. And then kind of a before and after picture. This is a view from the south of the house looking north. And so just some of the cleanup, removal of branches, safeguarding it and cleaning it up for the future work, and as well as for the visitor experience. To make it look a little nicer. So this is another tree throw, double tree throw within the village. This is at house 10, which is known as People Wish to Be Their house. So these 2 trees came up, and these large beams are house beams. So they're structural roof beams from the house. And so they've been lifted up into the air, and the house floor has been exposed in this house. the tree throw on the left is inside the house, and the tree throw on the right is at the front of the house, and also goes outside to the outside in front of the house. So this created quite a bit of exposed ground here. This house is also in a part of the village where there's a water flow that runs through it. So a lot of the ground is water saturated most of the year. And that's led to a lot of really good preservation. So now that these trees had exposed these sediments to the air and the elements, these perishable artifacts were deteriorating quite rapidly. So we identified these as threats to the cultural material. So on the left, in the upper corner, that's a photo of a leather shoe sole. And the lower left, there's wooden planks of this house that are exposed and starting to dry out and crack and peel. In the middle, there's a large cast iron pot. So a lot of artifacts were just exposed and left vulnerable on the ground surface. Also within the root ball itself, artifacts and sediment were started slumping out of those roots and being exposed that way. So it's a bone harpoon in the top right. And then also with this newly exposed ground, all of a sudden the seed bank in the ground that had been kind of repressed, I guess, by grasses that are growing on site now have this opportunity to grow. So we see this rapid growth of new vegetation, which is really exciting in some ways, in that these are a lot of culturally significant plants and food plants, but also the root system is impacting the house structure and further deteriorating it. So house 10, there is a lot of artifacts from the historic period that were on the surface. And so part of our 2019 work was to salvage them and safeguard them. So we brought them all first to the archaeology lab at UVic for processing, and they're now currently at the Gwaay Museum. And so a lot of material from the fur trade era and the 1800s. So a lot of trade beads, metal ads in the lower right, some decorative metal in the lower middle, so ceramic tableware fragments. We also recovered some bone tools. So the top left is a bird bone drinking straw and a sea mammal rib bone tool in the middle left, and then some ceramic tobacco pipes. So this is just a small selection of some of the artifacts, and there are quite a few, I think over 1,400 artifacts. Most of them were beads. About 1,100 of them were beads that came from this house, but it was pretty extraordinary. So that was a top priority, was to safeguard those. So then after that, we came back in August to do some formal archaeological excavations. So this was our 2019 field crew. And we did a small 50 by 50 centimeter test excavation in house 10 in the middle of the village there. And then we did a 1 meter by 2 meter trench in house 3. And that kind of transected the upper and lower semi-subterranean levels of that house. So going back to house 3, where this tree throw was, and that was going to be rewrited, that's where we stuck the excavation unit in that area where it is partially disturbed, and where this stump is going to come back down. So we wanted to learn what we could about the subsurface architecture of the house before the stump came down. So you can see the picture on the lower right is an example of what an interior of a house, a similar time frame, might have looked like. This house had a single step down. So house 3 had a double step. So you can imagine a secondary step going even lower. This photo is taken from a house in Alaska, and it's from the front of the house looking towards the back. So our excavation unit was at the front of the house here. So this was some of the excavation near the frontal pole. One of the things in stark contrast to the other house we were working at, there was a lot of gravel and silt really thin layers. It was pretty clean. There were very few artifacts. But when we got to the bottom, there was a bunch of cobbles, and we were a little bit curious what those might be. And so we just excavated a small 25 centimeter wide little column just to get a little bit of a better insight into what those cobbles were. We limited that excavation because we didn't want to further undermine or damage the house, but we also wanted to see what this was. So what we found with this extra excavation was that it looked like a series of living floor layers of gravel and silt, and then with a distinct activity layer, which included another bird bone straw, and there were some metal nails in the upper layers. And then as we got down to the feature, it started appearing about halfway down. So it was about a meter down. This is about almost 2 meters deep. In the cobbles, there were concentrations of elderberry seeds and Sitka periwinkle shells in between the cobbles. So their placement there kind of suggested like intentional placement and possibly like ceremonial for maybe when a previous pole or house post was erected in this location. And so we also took a radiocarbon date from the very bottom of the cultural sediments here. And so that dated between 1600 and 1800 years before present. So it gives us some indication that people were here being active here for like 1800 years. And so through that time, there would have been multiple iterations of houses being built here through time. And we were kind of starting to see a bit of that in this excavation, the remnants of these post holes and features of earlier construction episodes. So at house 10, we excavated a small unit here, and this was dug down a meter until we couldn't get deeper, and then we augured down another meter. So this was 2 meters of shell midden at this house with really dense shell and bone concentrations. It's kind of hard to see in this photo, but some of these layers in this sediment were almost exclusively bone, and it was just like a laminate of fish bone. So we took all the bone for analysis. And one of the key things that came out of that faunal analysis was that out of the over 14,000 bones that were examined from the site, over 95% of them were fish, and they were mostly salmon, rockfish, and halibut. 2.5% were bird, and these were mostly auklet, puffin, or elsids like ancient murrelet, that type of bird, and bald eagle. And 1.8% were mammal, and these were mostly sea otter, harbor seal, and whale. And by comparison for the two houses, 90% of the bone came from house 10, and that was 0.25 cubic meters of sediment that was excavated. And 7% came from house 3, which was 2 cubic meters of sediment. So again, we're seeing this pattern of a really rich concentration of material at the one house at 10 and very sparse material at house 3. The remaining fauna was from other tree throws exposed, and we collected large bones. So there was a little bit of extra analysis, stable isotope analysis conducted on some of the bone to kind of determine some of the reconstruction of the ancient kelp forest. And so that's kind of some of the types of analysis we're hoping to do for this project, is to kind of reconstruct what the past environment was like and use that to kind of inform future management and understand how people were living in the past. So, and part of that, part of the work was like the immediate response to the storm damage, but we also wanted to look at the island as a whole and as a cultural landscape. And doing that means looking at the relative sea level history for an area, because over time sea levels have changed, and people have either been by the water and now it's drowned, and so their sites underwater, or the sea levels were higher and people were maybe more further inland. So this is a graph that Daryl Fedge and colleagues established for the southern Haida Gwaay, which shows the relative sea level history here in red. So about 14,000 years ago, sea levels were about 150 meters lower than today. And then as glaciers melted and other various tectonics and and other Earth uh, mechanisms occurred, sea levels rose really rapidly to about 9,800 years ago, where they actually rose above modern, about 17 meters above modern, and kind of stabilized there. And about 6,000 years ago, sea levels started falling in southern Haida Gwaay to current levels. So that fits really well with that early date of 1600 to 1800 that we found in House 3, because any earlier than that, sea levels would have been higher, and the site would have not been a good place to live. It would have been either the beach or underwater at that time. So we also wanted to start looking inland for earlier time periods of human activity. And so we did that using the sea level history as well as high resolution modeling. So LiDAR map, which is basically a bare earth model of the landform stripped of all vegetation. And we're looking at places where maybe there would have been a nice bay, a good place to live or to have activities when sea levels were different. So on the right, you can see these curves are 1 meter contours on the map, and this would have been a nice bay with a nice berm on the right. And so we went and surveyed there, and there is some shell mid in there, and it looked like a substantial village site, and we got a date. And so this site dated to about 5,200 years old, and that fits really well with the sea level history here. So in previous work we did, we identified artifacts that are about 10,700 years old, and then we identified this site. And so part of our overall project as well is going to be filling in those gaps of time, and to see how people are living through the long term over the last more than 10,000. So once we get older than that, a lot of the earlier landform is underwater now. I also wanted to point out this little red circle here right behind the village. So this is like immediately behind the village. There was some cultural material there, some sediments, and we dated those to about 2,800 years old. So that's about 1,000 years older than the current village location, and that also fits well with the sea level history, that when sea levels are slightly higher, people are still in this area, but just inland a little bit. So that kind of set the stage for this project. So we wanted to propose a larger multi-year project to really investigate some of these questions. And so that's how the Living Landscapes came to be. And so this was, as Camille said, was supposed to start in 2020, but that led us to a whole other year of planning. And I think that was really great to have that extra time, because I think we spent a lot of time like ironing out wrinkles and making this really successful first field season. So I'm just really grateful that we had that time to plan, and everyone, it was an exhausting year, but everyone kept up their energy and interest in making this a success. And so this is our field crew from this season. So I'll just quickly run through first names. So we have James, Ian, Camille, Katie, Thea, me, Mary, Rebecca, Marilyn, Zoe, Christine, Siobhan, John, Nadine. And then in working with the Watchmen, we have Paul, Aretha, David, Sierra, and Jessica. So we're in the field for a month. Some of us were camped on site for the whole month, and then there was a few crew changes throughout. So some people were here for a week or 9-day shifts. So our camp life was kind of set up where half our crew was camping on island with our own tents, and then we had some wall tents set up for gear, and have a field lab as well, and just an outdoor kitchen area for additional shelter that we could maintain space. And then we dined outside together. Oh, I should say, and the other half of the crew were stationed at an operations cabin on Ellen Island, which is about 20-minute boat ride away. And so they'd come back and forth every day. And so we started the project off with an opening ceremony with elders Jenny and Vern, and it was a really good way just to get us all grounded into starting this off in a really intentional way. And this was a really good experience, an eye-opening experience for me. So Hawa for doing this and starting it out this way. So for this season's work, a lot of our focus is working towards the restoration program. So we're hoping to start restoring some of the house structures as close as we can to how they were in their pre-storm state, bearing in mind that these are old structures, the wood's pretty degraded, there's going to be limitations and logistical constraints, but we're wanting to mitigate any of the potential additional impacts that this type of restoration work will cause for the houses. So we're also continuing to assess danger trees and considering just how to manage the site for the future. For example, removing the threat of future blowdowns from the site and that type of thing. So a lot of the work we're doing is archaeological research, but also to inform like how to manage the site. So this year we focused again on house 3 and house 10. And so house 3, the house at the southern end, the semi-subterranean house, then Stintz's house, and then house 10 in the middle of the village. And we also did condition assessments and monitored tree throws around the village and did some preliminary testing inland. So this is house 10 and the tree throw. So this is, the top left is an image of right after the storm. And Mary's there, you can see the fresh impact. And on the lower left is after 2 years of sediment slumping out of the root ball and vegetation growth. And then the picture on the right is at the end of our field season after we excavated. So excavation was a little bit unconventional this year. Normally archaeology, we dig from the ground surface downward, and we're going from more recent to older sediments. This time we were excavating horizontally through the tree root, so we didn't have gravity on our side. But we're also going from lower sediments and older sediments upward toward the historical house floor, which is this wooden floor. And we excavated, the wood floor is preserved here. So we excavated right to the bottom of the floor. So you can see like individual boards and planks covering the floor. And so it just offered this really interesting perspective of coming up from below, and we're kind of wedged between cultural layers because we never excavated above the house floor, just below it. And this approach was really interesting too, just because normal excavation going down, the wood is actually very decomposed. So there's grass roots and it's starting to decompose when you dig downward. So it was really hard to identify individual boards and planks excavating it that way, just the way the decomposition happened. But the bottom of this wood preserved really well sitting on top of these other sediments, which are like shell-rich deposits. And so this allowed us to actually see the structure of the floorboards, which is super cool. And see how things, artifacts might have fallen between the cracks of the boards and any subsurface caching or activity areas. So here's a couple close-ups. The photo on the left, I'm pointing at a nail that's holding this cross plank together with a board on top of it. So lots of nails, and this was fully constructed floorboards. And on the photo on the right, you see this crack between two planks. There's a blue trade bead there and another artifact, which is a musket plate, which I'll have another photo of shortly. So you can actually see where these artifacts are situated on the floor. To complement the tree throw, we also did a 1 meter by 4 meter shallow excavation. This is all within the area of the tree throw disturbance. So this is a preliminary map of the area that the tree throw is disturbed. And our ultimate goal here is to map out where all the artifacts are and to see how people were using the house and like different activities within the house. So this excavation is along this yellow rectangle area, which complements the tree throw. So we'll stitch those together in the creation of this map. So all the excavated sediments were screened at the screening station. So set it up, had a lovely view. And this is where a lot of the work was pretty intensive to screen this material. There's a lot of bone, a lot of artifacts and tiny artifacts coming out of House 10. So this is a really crucial part of the excavation. And we water screened the material through 1/4 inch and 1/8 inch screens. So we're trying to catch the small artifacts, including the beads, of which there were a lot. So in 2019, there was a lot of these blue beads, often called Russian trade beads, and these red beads here. But this year, there's a whole variety of different colors and sizes of beads, ranging from tiny, tiny seed beads that you could barely put a thread through, to quite large beads as well in various colors. So like these ones are clear glass, but they're faceted just like these blue ones. You got a lot of like turquoise and teal ones and purple ones, and some made out of bone and shell as well. So most of these would have been like little beads that maybe have fall through the floorboards, but also there was a few concentrations of beads, like the one in the middle is these turquoise beads, and these would have been maybe on a necklace together, or at least like cached together or kept together. I'm trying to switch the, oh, there it goes. Okay. So some other smaller artifacts that we're finding on the house floor were ornamental bits of metal, Asian coins. There's a percussion cap from firearms, a thimble. So this was a pretty common artifact at the site, where there's a thimble that has a perforation, like a hole through the top. So that would have been repurposed, maybe for regalia or some ornament. And then buttons. So there's metal buttons, bone buttons, glass, and shell, mother of pearl. And this artifact on the lower right is, we think it's made out of horn. And it's been shaped into a square with a hole. So also potentially some ornament. Some of the larger artifacts. So here's that musket plate. This would have been from the fur trade era, firearm musket. And so it's a serpentine shape to it there. The lower left is, it looks like a sea mammal bone. This was actually split when we recovered it, so we could see the inside, and we can tell that it had a series of drill holes all down the margin of it. We don't quite know what this is, but maybe we're thinking potentially a comb. There might have been barbs it's slotted in these holes, but we're not sure exactly. The upper right, or the middle right, is a ground California mussel adze. So the side is ground, and then the working edge was ground to a point there. And then the lower right is a metal adze. So this would have been a nice curved working edge, and then the hafted on that side. And then, so this piece, this was kind of the jaw-dropping piece that from this house. It's an argillite carving. So it's a figurine. You see the eye here. There's been some really fine detail work on the sides, carved face. To Siobhan holding it. So that's for scale. It's kind of a miniature, potentially might have been from a miniature pole carving. So argillite is a stone. It's carvable. It's I've heard it's been compared to like soapstone as far as like being able to carve it. And as far as I know, there's one source, Slate Chuck Mountain, which is near Skidegate. So this would have been likely just brought down to the southern end of Haida Gwaay and worked on in the house. So it was recovered in two sections. So these are two pieces. the first one, and the second one, it was cracked and split here. And then it looked like the carver was trying to rework it and maybe put a peg hole with the intent of potentially putting the two pieces back together and mending it, but it was just never completed. So you could see this eye on the left, and there's no incision on the right side. It just wasn't completed there. So this was below some of the floorboards, and one of the pieces was wedged between two floorboards. So in addition to this, we found this tool bit, this metal tool bit that was about 1 meter away, and we compared it to this gouge shape in the back of the piece, and it seemed like a perfect fit. So this is potentially like even a tool that was being used to carve it. There was a lot of these little argillite flakes, so evidence that people were carving in the house itself. And the picture on the right is, that's the top half of the piece. So the face, it was sitting face up. So this was kind of looking from the bottom, and it was right next to this bone. So this bone might be part of associated with this artifact. It might not be, it might just be on the floor, but we have a lot of questions about this and want to learn more about who might have been carving it and when and that type of thing. I just wanted to mention, so basically we're fresh out of the field and we haven't really looked too deeply at any of these artifacts, so I still want to learn and have conversations on island with community members. I've already learned a lot from some of the watchmen and James at the museum, just in their knowledge of argillite carving. So it's really, I previous to this, I didn't really know much about the carving. So it's really eye-opening to hear what the experts have to say in this type of material work. Some other types of activities at the house were working sea mammal bone, so like whale bone. This is an interesting technique where holes are drilled in the bone and then used to split it apart and break it into pieces. And there's also quite a bit of paint and pigment in the house. So here's a horse clamshell with some paint in the bottom of it as a paint dish, and then some hard mineral pigments of different colors. So those some other activities really highlighting the richness and of activity and art, and yeah, just there's a lot going on in this house. So in addition to this too, there was also seed concentrations beneath the floorboards. So in the 2019, some of these seeds were observed, and they seem to be kind of medicinal seeds and maybe part of a medicine kit. And this year there was additional seed concentrations, and these ones seem to be more like berry seeds, so salmonberry and elderberry, potential berry cakes that were stored under the house. The seeds are the most persistent part of the plant, so there wasn't a lot of other organic material, but some thoughts were that maybe these were stored there in skunk cabbage leaves, but we'll have to do some more analysis to see if there's the remains of any of that material in these areas. So moving on to house 3. So we excavated it the same way. This is the back of the house, the tree throw. So digging into the root ball. And this photo really doesn't do it justice how much gravel was hauled out and screened from this house. Basically, the ground was all just clean beach gravels. And there's very few artifacts and a very, very thin house floor and potential wood boards, but otherwise it's very clean and there wasn't a lot there. There was a bit of California mussel shell concentrations, a little feature. And so this would have been the back bench of the house. And so kind of consistent with what we're finding in 2019, but also even more sparse and more gravel. So I don't know, that tells us something, which is a very different story from house 10. It also kind of, shows us like the construction of this house and how well-draining beach gravels would have been a great substrate for a semi-subterranean house. What else? So part of the program this summer was a bit of public archaeology. So as Camille was saying, the Watchmen are the guardians of the site and provide visitors tours of the site, but we worked really closely with them on a daily basis, what we're up to each day. And then if we had time, we would give a little spiel, maybe 5 minutes or 15 minutes about the archaeology we're doing to visitors and the various groups that came to site. So on the photo on the left, there's a Swan Bay rediscovery camp, kids camp. So they came to site one day, and then local tour groups like kayak or boat tour groups. So I'll just briefly talk about the newly recorded site. So outside the village, we did a little bit of survey in 3 areas. So just south of the village is this area called the Potato Patch, where potatoes were cultivated, and the Stone Quarry site, which was up kind of near where our camp was, and then the raised beach site in the middle. So looking at the LiDAR, it's this area in yellow, which is this nice double bay landform, and that would have been a nice northeast facing and southeast facing bay, which actually kind of echoes the current location of the village. And there's the beach from those 2 aspects as well. So in the Potato Patch area, we surveyed it in 2019, didn't see a lot of cultural material, but as materials slumping out of the tree stumps and root balls, it was exposing new sediment. And what we were seeing were a lot of these berry concentrations that we were seeing in House 10, and a wide variety of different types of berries. So I think in total, we saw about 11 concentrations, and a lot of them were like elderberry and salmonberry, but then there were some also seeds that weren't berry seeds. So we'll do some further analysis, excuse me, to compare, what was going and see what was going on south of the village, the activities going on in this cleared area, and maybe compare it to what was going on within the house as well. So the quarry site was a vein quartz quarry. So you could see it was observed in this tree throw, and there's some bedrock and then some crushed up quartz within the bedrock. And so about 5 hammerstones and a bunch of this crushed quartz. And we're actually seeing this quartz inside the houses as well. So this is maybe a local material people are collecting on island and bringing to the house to work on as tools. It's not the prettiest rock to shape into things like spear points or that type of thing, but it does have a really sharp edge and it's really strong and hard. This would have been a really great local source of stone material. And then the raised beach site. So here's James doing a test excavation, and the sediments are these old beach cobbles. And then in amongst that, there were a few stone flakes, so from chipped stone tools. So these could be anywhere within the last 9,000 years. They could be about that old or more recent, because people may have been going inland and doing activities inland more recently. So this is just a small taste. So we want to go back here and test some more and see what else is in this area. And so for next steps for the project, so we're currently here in Haida Gwaay at the Haida Gwaay Museum, working on the collections and processing them and doing some preliminary analysis and community engagement. And we'll be coming back again later this winter to do some more work at the museum. There'll also be some additional tree removal work this winter to help clean up the site a bit more. And then summers of 2022 and 2023, we're planning to have 2 more archaeological field seasons. And in 2023, we're looking to do some of the restoration of the house structures within the village. And then, so here's just a picture of what's going on at the lab right now, or I guess this past week. So there's Katie and Mary cleaning artifacts and organizing them. And slide is kind of not really moving. Oh, there you go. Yep. So that concludes this presentation. So Hawa, thank you everyone for attending, and yeah, I guess we'll open up to questions. You're on mute, Camille.
I just realized I was chatting away. So I was just going to say, if anybody has questions, they can write them in the chat function. That's how I believe this works. This is my first time presenting a speaker series over Zoom, or even using Zoom at all. So I was a bit flustered at first. I was frustrated that we had to do this over technology, but then I'm sort of realizing now that we can just reach a much broader audience this way. So it's kind of cool, I guess.
Another way
So
they can do comments, sorry, Camille, is they can raise their hand and I'll unmute them and they can speak live.
Okay. Yeah, so I might just answer a few questions that were in the chat function first.
Yeah, we'll do those ones first.
There was a question from Michelle McDonald on the Facebook Live feed, and she asked, what is the thought? Do we try to save the pools and the house areas beside cutting trees and plants away to save them? Or what other means do we use for prevention to save those cultural sites? So that's actually a good question. So we were actually just at Gwaay today. We flew down there for the day before we came into the office for this presentation. It's been kind of a hectic day, but the reason we were at Gwaay today, part of our mandate this year is to clean up the site, clean up the blowdown, the devastation, try to restore the site to its sort of, former glory without all these sort of ugly snags laying around everywhere. But also our mandate is to also mitigate any other potential hazards or mitigate any other damage to the cultural resources. So prevention instead of intervention. So by prevention, I mean, we'll do things like we'll remove danger trees to safeguard the poles and house remains. We do this with local contractors typically, people who are arborists and they have danger tree certification. So what they do is they go around site and they assess trees that have a high potential of falling over. And then what we do is we either remove the tree or limb the tree, try to mitigate any sort of impact that that tree might have on the site. So that's what we do to sort of try to, I guess, save our cultural resources at Gwaay from any further damage. And then Michelle also had another question. Since climate change has raised tides, do we do studies below tidal areas and how do we save those? I think it might have been cut off, so I'm not really quite sure, but we do intertidal surveys to find intertidal archaeology sites. We also monitor shoreline erosion in Gwaay. So we have a shoreline erosion monitoring program, and that sort of measures the rate of erosion at certain sites. We also just try to look around on the shorelines to see if there's any sort of like artifacts or cultural materials eroding from the shorelines, because the undercutting from erosion happens at a pretty rapid rate in a lot of places, Gwaay especially. So we just try to do sort of visual monitoring too at a lot of really important sites to make sure that things aren't sort of eroding out of the banks, remains or cultural materials and things like that. And then, so next question came from the Facebook Live feed, Martin Dunn. He asked, were any of the descendants of Gwaay contacted in being involved, in brackets, off-islanders? So short answer to that is no. So what we typically do at Gwaay is cooperatively managed by the Council of the Haida Nation and sorry, one sec, I'm just getting distracted by my screen. So Guayhanas is cooperatively managed by the Archipelago Management Board. So that consists of representatives from the Government of Canada and the Haida Nation. They vet any sort of projects that we may do, and they make their decisions based on consensus. So typically we have to ask the AMB for their blessing to go forward with any project. But with this project, because Gwaay is such a sacred and special place, we actually have been bringing the CHN and the Haida Hereditary Chiefs Council. We've been presenting to them since the get-go. So since the initial storm damage in 2019, we've been updating them on this project, and we actually sought their blessing to proceed with archaeology on the site, simply because it can be a contentious thing. And we didn't want it to be that way. We wanted to go in with this feeling good feelings. Nadine, Mary, and myself, we're Haida citizens, and we take into account Haida laws and traditions in our work whenever we go forward with anything. And that said, you may have seen all these beautiful artifacts sort of been, removed from the site. All the artifacts and any cultural material taken from Guayhanas at any time is permanently housed in the Haida Gwaay Museum. And that is so the Haida people, first and foremost, can have access to those collections from Guayhanas and be able to learn and educate with those. Yeah, so those are the questions that I saw from the Facebook Live. So I'm just going to go through my chat really quickly to see if there's any other ones in the Zoom chat now. So Leah, wondering two things. Where do folks believe the ceramic straw came from? What ceramic source? Also, do you believe there was any enrichment of the soil intentionally by bones, berries, shells, or anything to increase plant harvesting around longhouses or anywhere else? And then she said, however, your time and effort, your work is very exciting, contributes so much to our culture. So Leah just made a correction. She was talking about the ceramic pipe. So maybe I'll let Jenny speak to that.
Yeah, the ceramic pipes, a lot of them were actually manufactured in England or Scotland, and they were really common from that time period of like the 1700s, 1800s, and they were very common, very, what's the word, like cheaply made, and also would break easily. So there's a lot of sites all over from that time period, not just here on the coast, but through all like trade networks and in England and in other parts of the world as well, where these pipes are just persistent at sites because once they'd expire, they would be often broken and left on site. So short answer is, yeah, they were manufactured and then traded all along the coast and used on the coast. And then, sorry, what was the second question? Oh, about the soils. So there are accounts of enriching soil, like for planting and cultivating plants like potatoes and Haida tobacco. And so there are accounts of that. Shell midden, it's not really a great name because it doesn't really fully capture what the sediment is. So a lot of time there might be discard areas where there's a lot of shell, and that's naturally going to add carbon and enrich the sediment there. But also in a lot of places that's also been intentionally used for terraforming and enriching the soil. So we're still looking to see how that was all being applied here. There's very different things going on with the sediment at this site. So there's some areas where there's a lot of cultural sediments and some areas where it's very thin and there's very little, and it looks like mostly old beach deposits and gravels or bedrock. And so we're seeing these little pockets where we are seeing cultural sediments elsewhere throughout the village. So that's going to be one of the questions we're going to be looking at over the next few years, is like how people were just doing things on the site and how sediments were being managed and plants were being managed, and just different activities.
So I think that, Ilea, we can probably move on to allowing people to raise their hand if they want to ask a question.
I'm not too sure if you can see me trying to unmute you, Alex Wick, but I'm giving it a go. I have asked him to unmute it. It doesn't seem to be going through, and we just had the one so far. I guess he's having technical difficulties. I can't seem to get him to speak here. And then he popped off, so maybe it was internet. There are a couple extra in the chat if you want to answer those instead, since I couldn't get him to work.
I just realized I'm so close to my camera. I couldn't see myself the whole time because I'm on an iPad. I'm like, oh my gosh, I look ridiculous. Okay, so we have another Michelle McDonald. I think that was the next one. Yeah. So she asked, what about village sites outside of Gwaay that is not under the A and B? So that's outside of our sort of purview at Gwaay, I guess you can say. So I actually can't answer that question, but if anybody from CHN wants to chime in, maybe about village sites that are outside of Gwaay, Jenny and I, we only manage sites that are within the boundaries of the National Park Reserve and National Marine Conservation Area Reserve and Haida Heritage Site, which is Gwaay. So if anybody from CHN has any information or insight, if not, we are happy to get back to you. We can find out some answers to that and get back to you via email.
I'm not seeing anyone that may be able to answer that on CHN side.
I did see a question about video. So maybe that's something you wanted to talk about, Camille?
Yeah, so some of the products that are coming out of this project. So this is a 3-year project. There are a lot of moving parts to it. Some of our other programs, like we mapped the ancient Uralic colony. We did sediment sampling at a pond at SGang. So it's a pretty multifaceted project. But one of the products that we're trying to develop out of this is sort of like a mini documentary, which will just be like a short 5-minute documentary for each year of archaeology on site. We were going to show it on the Zoom meeting / Facebook Live, but we realized that it was sort of glitchy. So Ilea is going to post a YouTube link onto the CHN Facebook page, which you can watch that clip. It's a trailer for a documentary. The videographer, his name is Gaetan Lemaire, and he worked with us on site while we were in the field in August. He did a really great job of sharing the story, and we're really excited to sort of share this video with you. This is a trailer for what's to come, so stay tuned and hopefully it gets your worms wiggling. Yeah, so I guess if there's no more questions, we are just going to shut down the meeting, but I just wanted to say thank you to Jenny for presenting tonight, and thank you to Ilea for setting it up, and Stephanie Fung, and a huge hawa to Mary Hart and Nadine Wilson, who are also huge leaders in this project as well. So thank you, everybody. Hawa.
Thank you.
Thanks everybody for the nice comments also. We're just reading them in the chat right now.